Okay, some residents of downtown Ottawa on the anti-pandemic measures protests that have been taking place in this city since Friday. Police are out in large numbers to ensure the demonstration remains peaceful, but they are also investigating reports of threats, harassment, and desecration. Ottawa police are estimating the cost of handling the protest at about $800,000 per day. Jim Watson is the mayor of Ottawa, and he joins me now. Mr. Mayor, thanks for taking the time. I'd like to start there with that price tag, if I could, that $800,000. Have you reached out to the federal or provincial government to see if you can get some help with that?
Well, on a formal basis, we will. I spoke with the Prime Minister not too long ago, and he certainly offered his support, and we thank him for that. He's been a good friend to cities across the country. And the $800,000 is just police costs. We, of course, have city costs. You have to go in there and clean the mess up. You know, these people are treating this like a tailgate party and drinking and barbecuing and everything else on Wellington Street. So that has to be cleaned up. We have extra resources for bylaw officers, paramedics, and so on. And it shouldn't be up to the property taxpayers of Ottawa to absorb those costs. So we'll certainly look to our partners in the other orders of government.
The protesters have a GoFundMe account that's raised over $9 million, and I believe one of your councillors suggested today that maybe you should take some legal action to try to go get a piece of that money to cover some of these costs. Is that something you're considering, you think you could do?
Yeah, I actually asked our city solicitor for an opinion on that, because why should we be absorbing the cost of the mess that these characters have created? You know, it's one thing to sort of spew litter all over Wellington Street. It's another thing to urinate on the tomb of the unknown soldier and dance on the tomb and try to get free meals from a soup kitchen and desecrate Terry Fox's statue by putting anti-mask flyers and placards all over him. I think, any sympathy that this group had coming into Ottawa is quickly evaporated, because this kind of boorish behavior and harassing our city employees, harassing 18-year-old, a student working at a McDonald's, just asking the person to put on a mask, or at a hotel clerk reservation center. These kinds of things are not acceptable in a civil society, and the organizers, quite frankly, should be standing up, and they should have been standing up days ago, condemning everything from Nazi swastika flags to the Confederate flag. This is not, Canadian value to bring that such hatred and such disrespect to sacred ground that is the war monument. That's where Corporal Cirilla was shot dead, protecting the tomb of the unknown soldier.
Mr. Mayor, given that despite that long list of actions that you've just outlined, you said earlier today that protesters are not being ticketed, they're not being towed, because you're worried about the potential for violence and inciting them. I mean, what sort of a message does it send to the people of Ottawa that if they show up in sufficient numbers and act in a sufficiently threatening way, that the police just have to stand by and wait for them to leave on their own?
Well, just as we rely on our medical professionals, and that's where I get my medical advice on COVID-19, not from truckers, but from scientists and doctors, it's the same with the policing. I have to rely on the expertise of our chief of police, who has 35 years of service, including dealing with the G20, which was another high tense situation in Toronto a few years ago. And when you're going to try to put out a fire, you don't throw gasoline on it. A lot of these people came to Ottawa very angry, with a lot of hate in their heart, and they wanted a confrontation. They knew that a confrontation would generate more media coverage, and that's not what we want. We want to de-escalate the situation. That's the mandate of the chief of police: de-escalate and continue to negotiate. I know it's frustrating for people who live in the central core that the tow trucks aren't towing these trucks away and ticketing them. But I think, what I've heard from Chief Slowly on a number of occasions, it's always just a very fine line between calm and complete chaos. And we want to make sure that we continue to see trucks leave, and we've seen in the last 12 hours a number of trucks have left. We've opened up the Sir George Etienne Cartier Parkway, and I think 3/4 of Sir John A. Macdonald is open up again. So people are starting to leave. There are going to be some diehards, but there are contingency plans for that the police will implement when appropriate.
I appreciate the need to de-escalate, and I know there are security information and threat matrices that we wouldn't necessarily be aware of publicly, but there's also a perception of fairness under the law. And if you go back to November 2020, it took a day and a half for Black and Indigenous protesters to shut down one intersection before the police went in and arrested 12 of them and cleared out the intersection. There's only been one arrest made since all of this has been going on. I mean, do you understand why people might say there's a double standard and feel like this largely white crowd is being treated differently?
I can understand that, and I also understand the frustration of people who live in the neighborhood who feel, threatened and intimidated, and that's why the chief announced today that they're redeploying their community officers into those neighborhoods, those urban neighborhoods, Sandy Hill, Lower Town, Byward Market, Centertown, Golden Triangle, to try to give some sense of comfort to those individuals who have had to put up with honking of horns, all hours of the night. Kids can't get to sleep. The smell and stench of diesel fuel in the air. This is not acceptable. This is a neighborhood, as you know, David. Parliament Hill is, lots of nice, beautiful government buildings, but there are neighborhoods behind these buildings, and these people live there. And I'd ask some of the truckers who are taking part in this activity and being so vulgar about it and harassing, how would you like this to take place in your hometown? No one wants to put up with this kind of nonsense, and I think the time has come for this group. They've had their 15 minutes. Move on, go back and talk to your members of parliament in your own ridings and allow our city to rebuild, because we're like every other city. We're down for the count because of COVID-19. Today was the big day where we're going to be opening restaurants, and a number of restaurants in the downtown core, for fear of yahoos coming in with no mask and causing a scene, would be disruptive to their employees and the safety of their employees.
Well, speaking of members of Parliament, I wonder how you feel about the fact that Conservative members of Parliament are lending such loud and vocal support to these protesters. I saw Glenn Motz, who's the MP for Medicine Hat, speaking on the stage earlier today, just before lunchtime, in the middle of the blockade on Wellington. And local area MPs like Pierre Poilievre have been very supportive of them. I mean, what's your reaction to that level of support from the federal Conservatives as the mayor of the capital city?
Well, sadly, not surprised. That kind of behavior is completely unacceptable. Pierre represents the city of Ottawa, albeit a rural part of the city of Ottawa, but he's still an Ottawa MP. And I think it's despicable egging these people on, particularly when they've been so disgraceful towards sacred ground, whether it's the cenotaph or Soup Kitchen or the Terry Fox statue or smashing windows of city vehicles and paramedic vehicles. They should be standing up and demanding an apology from the organizers for this anti-Semitism, this racism that we've seen in the nation's capital. I always consider Ottawa everyone's second hometown in Canada. We welcome people here, but this kind of boorish behavior and this kind of outrageous language and intimidation should be condemned by local MPs, Conservative MPs, and not condoned and not get up on the stage with Maxime Bernier. It's like not a good image for the Conservative Party, that's for sure.
So Mayor, just final question. I mean, how does this end? I mean, when do you start ticketing and towing and moving people? Because we're hearing from hotels associations that they're rebooking for next weekend. So there's an intention here. I mean, they have a memorandum of understanding that they want to stay until the government is replaced. So, I mean, when does more aggressive action or firm action start moving them out?
Well, first of all, that manifesto is so ridiculous in so many ways. Just ignore the fact that we just had an election and there's a governing party and they have the right to govern. As I said, there are contingency plans, David. We don't discuss those. We don't discuss the timing of it. But I'm interested in this situation being resolved sooner than later. I don't want this thing to go on for weeks. I want it to get wrapped up as quickly as possible. And I have confidence in the police. I asked for the patience of the people of Ottawa. They've been very patient through a very horrific episode the last 3 or 4 days, especially those that live in the Central Core. And we will get through this. We don't want it to flare up to something that would cause injury or death to anyone. And we want this to resolve peacefully and allow these people to get on their way and leave our city because you've worn out your welcome.
Okay, Mayor Watson, thanks for your time. I'm sure we'll talk again.
Great, thanks, David.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.